Guten Morgen. My name is April Edwards. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft, and I'm also the DevOps practice lead. I am based in the UK, and I'm here to join you all today to talk about PowerShell. When I wrote this talk, I called it PowerShell for every system because I couldn't think of a name. We're going to talk about open source, we're going to talk about PowerShell, and we're going to write some code. I did not prep a demo. We're going to do this on the fly. So if any of you have ever seen me talk live or seen any of my live demos, I just wing it because it's DevOps and it's real life, right? And the reality is we all start somewhere. So we're going to do a little bit of a group effort. We're going to do some stuff together. Before we get started, I'm going to drag Robert Strand up onto the stage. Robert is my friend. We run the, God, what's the name? Sorry, my caffeine's failing me. The Azure Cloud Native User Group. We run it globally. Robert is based out of Norway. Yes. Norway. I'm based out of London, and we have two other gentlemen on the team. One's in Ireland, and one's in the north of the UK. So we talk about a lot of stuff. We always encourage people to give content. We run it globally. We do want to do it in different geographical regions coming up, and the reason why I'm promoting the group is because we want to get more of the community involved. And when I'm talking about the stuff today, community is going to be really important, because I wouldn't be here because of without any of you. I've got a lot of supporters here that I see on Twitter and friends who promote what I do, and we promote their content. So we're going to talk about open source as part of the community, because I find that this conference, and I was also at PowerShell Summit in the US, have a massive community presence. And that's a lot of how we learn. We take time out of our days. We do stuff in the evenings to learn and to grow our careers. And Robert does a lot of his time to get the user group running. And I think you guys are running a podcast as well. Yep. I won't be doing the podcast. I've got too much on, unfortunately. Yep. But yeah, so check out the user group. Thank you, Robert, for letting me pick on you. So my name is April Edwards. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on LinkedIn. Please do not send me emails because it is a black hole, because I will not answer it. This is my coding buddy and partner in crime, Sir Titan. This is requested by Jess in the front row. If I don't do a talk without dog pictures now, it doesn't count. Titan is an American who flew over to England, so that's why he got the name Sir Titan. He's my coding buddy. He's a 69-kilo Great Dane, and he literally follows me everywhere I go now. So Jess, are you happy? Great. Want to thank all the sponsors for having us here today, all the cool t-shirts, all the cool stuff. Big fan of Chocolatey. I put a post up about Chocolatey versus WinRM recently, and Chocolatey's good stuff. So Mr. Snover is not here with us today, unfortunately, but he has a great quote that I like to talk about. In a lousy economy, nothing is more important than automation, because productivity equals career security. And the reason why I like talking about this is because if we start doing things by hand, pointing, clicking, we can't take a holiday, we can't take a vacation. While I talk a lot about DevOps, I'm not really going to talk about DevOps, but some of the practices are important to every one of us. I have massive respect for Jeffrey, and he was a big initiator in my career where I was working in an organization and it was pointy, clicky, everything, and I managed a lot of systems. And then when we moved to the cloud, I was like, I'm going to be out of a job. And actually, I just started to learn to automate things, even in the cloud. So there's a huge amount of value for that, and that really helped progress my career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of PowerShell. All of us here probably know about it, so I'm not going to whoops, and my slide broke, but that's okay. So we had Windows PowerShell, right? That's where I started my career, PowerShell 2.0, managing Windows environments, SharePoint, Exchange, Windows Server. That was my day in and day out life. When PowerShell Core came about, it was very much a cross-platform tool. And I had a really good, we'll call it discussion, with my former manager. He was an open source guy. So open source, and by the way, he worked for Microsoft, still does. So open source, he ran Linux on his desktop, his workstation, his primary workstation. He wouldn't even run Office if he didn't have to. He would avoid every Microsoft tool, even though Microsoft signs his paycheck. He grew up in the open source arena. I learned a lot from him. But one of the things I said to him, I said, well, PowerShell's open source. And we started having this back and forth argument at work in front of a lot of people in our engineering team. And I said, you used to be called the Windows person, right? How many of you were the Windows person in your career? I was. When I joined that same engineering team with my manager, he called me the Windows Battle Lord, because I answered customers' questions about Windows devices and server, just random bits of knowledge. And I said, I don't want to be known as the Windows Battle Lord, right? I don't want to be in that little niche pocket, because I just don't know Windows. I know a lot of stuff. So they started calling me the Battle Lord. And I used to have all back in the day when we had, company business cards, the Battle Lord is my title. So I made him get away with the Windows thing, and we started having this back and forth argument about open source. I said, it's not about Windows person, Linux person. It's about cross-platform. Can you deliver cross-platform stuff? I've worked with a lot of sysadmins that are Linux focused. And I'm like, do you want me to call you the Linux person? They're like, no. So it's about being cross-platform. It's about being agile in our organizations and what we do with our technologies. Broke another slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So PowerShell. Why did it evolve in the way it did? Because they want to be able to improve your life. How many think PowerShell's improved their life? How many think it hasn't? It's an easy audience to ask that question, right? It's like shooting fish in a barrel. We wanted to be able to make, the PowerShell team, I'm not on the PowerShell team, want to be able to make your life easier. They want to make sure that you can do it for all types of people, to be that glue language to bring those systems together. So when I started going from those Windows environments to the Azure environment, I was like, oh, I can still use PowerShell. I still have a job. And then I took that even further when in my development life cycles, when I'm doing CI/CD pipelines and doing automation and why that's really important. And we talk about it in an operations point of view, and very much so in how we manage our devices. That same manager that was very, very open source focused, we're working on a customer project, we're doing some stuff in pipelines, and we're like, oh, we got to do this thing. I was like, let's do it in PowerShell. Well, we could use Bash. I'm like, why the hell would we use Bash? PowerShell will make it easier and it's better. It was flat out what I said. So I showed him a script, we did it, we ran it in our pipeline, and he went, cool. And I took 5 guys on my team and converted them to PowerShell lovers through CI/CD pipelines. So I converted them through using a really simple script to do something. And I also used a cleanup tool in it. So we need to simplify this automation, not just be able to run scripts and do all the stuff, but we need to build on that legacy user trust. PowerShell had to evolve through the times, and it really has. That's why I'm a big fan of it. That's why I spend a lot of time with the team and a lot of the products that I'm helping to write some of the Learn modules. So you can pretty much use PowerShell everywhere, and I think all of us know this. This is a good slide to show. I mean, look, if you're multi-cloud, cross-platform, literally AWS or GCP, bring your PowerShell with you, right? I find it's one of the tools you can literally take it anywhere you go. So on the open source side, when Satya came into the organization, we wanted to invest in open source more heavily than we already do. Or we did at the time. And why we did that? Because we wanted to be more agile. We wanted to have more of a sense of community and more of a sense of transparency. And that was really important to him and us as an organization. And that's why we started open sourcing a lot of our tools. We have that direct interaction between our users and the community. We have faster release cycles. Someone out here who's not on the PowerShell team knows how quickly the PowerShell team releases a new feature? Anyone? What's your release cycle, Sydney? 3 weeks?
Like monthly PowerShell releases?
Yeah, monthly. Yeah, about a monthly PowerShell release. They're releasing new features every month because they're continuously improving. Other product teams, if anyone saw my talk yesterday, release at different cycles. The Azure DevOps product group, and I say that because I work closely with them, they're every 3 weeks. A lot of teams like Xbox release stuff every 2 to 3 weeks as well. Every team has their own release cycle, but we're continuously giving you those new features in that release cycle, which is really important. And we have a massive community. You guys are absolutely the embodiment of the PowerShell community, which I think is great. We talk a lot about open source at Microsoft. I wrote a blog the other day about Java, deploying Java onto Azure. I'm not a Java expert. I was working with a colleague, wrote a blog about it, and someone goes, can I deploy my Java application onto Azure? And I was like, it's in the video. But yes, it's literally any language, right? So we know it's a differentiator for organizations. We know that organizations that embrace open source are 30% more innovative, and they're a lot more successful. We know that developer satisfaction rates increase. We use the word developer, and I know it's a sore spot for a lot of people. IT professional, IT automator, whatever we want to call ourselves. When we're happy at our jobs, we stay at our jobs and we innovate more. We're enabled more to do better throughout our life cycles. I really like this map of Azure because it shows kind of everything we do in this big grouping, right? Every single one of these products, we can use PowerShell against it in Azure. Underpinning all of this stuff, we have edge devices, right? How many of you have a smartwatch? Absolutely. You can start uploading that data to Azure. You can start manipulating that data. Yes, Jess, I'm going to talk about data again. Don't get too excited. But data underpins everything we do, right? Our storage elements, etc. We can do things with the Internet of Things, with the media. We can do AI and ML. We can do such great things, and most of these tools are open source that we offer up. On Azure, we have a lot of other products. Linux is one of the fastest growing items on the platform. We hear a lot of people talk about cloud native. The reality is over 50% of the running virtual machines on Azure are Linux-based. They're not Windows-based. So that is why the PowerShell team has to adapt. That's why all of us have to adapt. It isn't just about Windows devices anymore. Again, collaborating, securing, and being flexible. We talk about securing a lot. We talk about securing from day one. It's a really important part of our feature. Again, we talk about Azure having all this great capability. There's a bunch of stats, basically. Just to take away with. But we're going to talk about Visual Studio Code in a minute. We're actually going to deploy some code. You guys are going to be tired of hearing from me. So we're going to do something together. So how many of you use Visual Studio Code? Pretty much everyone. I was really sad when PowerShell ISE disappeared, theoretically. And I really started embracing Visual Studio Code. I started writing better code. We still have a lot of customers that don't use Visual Studio Code. I worked with a very large car manufacturer located next door to us in Germany. They didn't believe in Visual Studio Code as an enterprise level product. They used Notepad++. So we're sitting in the room with the customer, trying to do this massive project. I had a great engineer with me, and we're writing some Terraform, some infrastructure as code. And he's like, I'm stuck. I can't find this issue. 4 hours into it. I said, let me have a look. Pull up his code into my Visual Studio Code. I was like, oh, it's right there. He's like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, syntax highlighting. We lost 4 hours on a simple thing. One of the hardest things that my colleagues face in the UK is Z versus S, right? In the UK, you put an S where you have a Z, and a lot of language are unfortunately English-based, so it's a really tough thing. But having things like Visual Studio Code to help pull those things out is really important. Visual Studio Code does some really cool stuff with the community. Their stuff is open source. You can go into their GitHub repos, see what they're doing, open up an issue. You could also contribute different types of extensions to Visual Studio Code, which is awesome. So we're going to talk a little about GitHub Co-Pilot. So I have a little bit of rain on my parade. If any of you have caught up with GitHub Co-Pilot, it is generally available now. It was under preview before. They have released their pricing. So due to the pricing, it may not be viable for a lot of people. So we're going to talk about it a little bit today. I am in no way involved with marketing or the pricing and how that's involved. But it's an AI pair programmer. And the reason I'm going to talk about GitHub Copilot is because before the pricing announcement, it was awesome. We're going to open up Visual Studio Code and write a PowerShell script and see what it pops up for us, see if it's valid or not. It helps us write tests. It helps us write better code. Now, if you're working in a language you're not very familiar with, that's really helpful. It goes out and pings the databases of the world and picks bits of code and helps you inject it into your code. The other reason why I really like it is because it helps us with different accessibility issues. I was going to put some slides in about accessibility. I have some teammates in Microsoft doing some really great work in that space. But I think what it comes down to is as we're writing code, we all have different ways we write code. We have different ways we learn. We have different ways we write. And we have all different things that play into how we write code that we don't even realize. Some of you may be dyslexic, right? We work in an industry where we're all different, right? Not one of us are the same. And we all kind of fell into this industry. I always thought, oh, I'm just a little different, and that's okay. But I also realized I had some of my own accessibility issues to overcome. And mine are quite visual and mental. I struggle with focus, which is one thing. The 69-kilo dog doesn't help. But for me, it was just how I was reading my code. So I use different visual aids within Visual Studio Code to help read my code. Because if I was working in Notepad++, other than the fact that I hate it, it's black and white. It is literally black and white. So sometimes highlighting my text to different colors helps me. Sometimes on the type of code I'm working on, it really doesn't. So having those visual aids really help. I also had an issue where my code was slanting up in Visual Studio Code. I noticed that if I work long hours, my eyes get really tired. And I start missing things. So I went and got some glasses, kind of fixed my astigmatism, and my code was looking a little bit more level, but at the end of the day, it was still going up. So I had to kind of address that. But I also realized I was just missing stuff in my code. If I was writing a markdown file, I was missing words, and I couldn't figure out why. So I had to go from, sometimes have to change from a black background to like a gray background or modify the colors, just to adjust the eye fatigue during the day and my focus. So I think GitHub Copilot aids us in writing better code. My whole hopes of showing you some really cool stuff. We're going to kind of step back from that a little bit, okay? It is a great tool. Check it out. You can still get into the preview, but I'm just going to caution you the pricing's coming out. I believe it's August 22nd, and I'd like to see them change the pricing model a little bit, but we'll see. I have no effect in that. So we're going to talk about securing our code. How many of you have worked for organizations that say open source is not secure? Really? I expected more. 4 or 5-ish, okay. That, I would say that's definitely changed. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I worked for a lot of organizations that wouldn't use open source code at all. When a lot of the open source code usually isn't hosted in GitHub, there's a few things that help us be more secure in that code, right? GitHub has tooling to look for secret scanning within the repository. Now, the problem with that is if you have passwords or secrets, connection strings in your repository, you've already pushed that code. GitHub has just released what they call GitHub Push Protection. GitHub Push Protection picks up your secret or connection string when you're pushing your pull request. And if it sees it, it will stop it and go, can't proceed any further, a secret was found. The caveat to that is it's literally a brand new feature. It only picks up certain types of connection strings. It works for different services, so check it out. It definitely works for Azure. I went to push in my demo connection string for a storage account. It picked it up. There were a few hiccups in Visual Studio itself versus Visual Studio Code. They have resolved that. I have not tested it in a GitHub code space, and it only picks up certain secrets. But watch it. It's going to come a lot further in its progress in the next few months. They have a roadmap published. It's really good to look at to say, right, we can scan our repositories, right, and go, we have a secret or password in there, but what if we can prevent it before it happens, right? We want to start secure and stay secure. We also have things like CodeQL. How many of you have used CodeQL before? A few of you. So CodeQL scans your repo. So every time you push a PR, it runs a scan through and looks at your code, looks at the language. It automatically detects the language that you're using in your repository. So it's pretty cool. So enough of me talking about stuff. We're just going to go see it. So the first thing we do is I have a GitHub repository here. I have a couple PowerShell scripts that are terrible. Oh, you didn't want to see it, did you? That is security. There we go. I have a GitHub repository here. It is set to private. I can make it public for everyone, but it's really not anything fancy. I've put in my source control. I've put in a quick little readme, and it's got some scripts in it. So from here, we can do a couple things. What is missing from this repository? Technically not, but yeah, maybe. What else? It's missing a lot of things, but right in the front here, we don't have a dev container. No dev container. Every project should have a dev container, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about dev containers and why they're important. We talk about not being a Windows person, not being a Linux person. If every, and I'm going to use the word developer, no, I'll take that back, person, if every person's environment is the same, we can't use the phrase, it worked on my machine. We can test everything in an ideal environment with all the tooling we need without getting started. So if I go to get started on this project, this is really small and really simple. I have to install extensions and things to get going, and that takes time. A lot of times we struggle with getting access and getting the toolings, or we run tests and our machines break. I've worked with so many customers that when we get started on a new customer project, they literally can't install the tools on their machine. They don't have admin access. Their machines can't handle it. I don't know how many people I work with like 8 gigs of RAM or 4 gigs of RAM, and I'm like, what year is it? But they don't get good production machines to write their code. So this is where the dev container comes in. We can spin up the dev container, give them all the extensions and things they need to get going, and develop in a secure environment. And we're going to take this a step further. We're going to develop this dev container. What can we do with our dev container? It means every person that goes into this project opens up a dev container in Visual Studio Code, and they're all working from the same baseline project. They have all the tooling they need. Now, the other thing we can do is we can spin this up in a GitHub code space. What's so cool about a GitHub code space? It's a secure container in which to write your code. So I'm traveling this week, and let's say that I don't have this laptop. I have another laptop. So I don't have Visual Studio Code installed. I can spin up my dev container in a secure environment with all the tools I need and write my code in a browser. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So the first thing I can do is, if I'm anywhere in the world, I'm working off a browser, and I hit a period or full, not that way, sorry. If I hit a period or full stop, I get a little text editor right out of GitHub. It's going to open it up. It's going to give me access to my files. And it's going to load. And now this is all internet dependent. So every time I do this demo and build a dev container out, sometimes it breaks. So if it breaks, we have a backup, right? Cool, so I can see my source code here. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. How's that? Can everyone see that? Cool. I have a source control file here. I have my 2 scripts, really simple. I have a git ignore file. I put a git ignore file into every single project. It means I'm going to ignore things with that extension. So if I have executables, things to install, anything that I might need I don't want to go into my repository, when I push that code up, it's going to go into that git ignore. And every project should have a README. Okay, mine's really simple for this purpose, but it has something, right? So I can do that. But this is great, but there's things missing from this. I can't run and debug my code from this editor. I can make quick edits. I can change my branch. I can do all sorts of things. None of my extensions are loaded here on the left-hand side. It is literally a quick and dirty editor. I would do it to do documentation. That is it. I wouldn't use it for much else. It doesn't have, it's secure, but it's not really secure. You're not running in that container. You're not running in a secured environment. You can't do a lot with it. But let's go to the other side of the fence here. We're going to go back to our code. We're going to spin up a dev container. So when we go to clone our code, we can clone it here. We can clone it locally in Visual Studio Code. We can clone it with GitHub Desktop. We can open in Visual Studio. We're going to go to GitHub Codespace. I have already opened one, but I'm going to go ahead and create one from scratch for you. And the name refractored broccoli is automatically given to me. I didn't choose that name. So GitHub Codespaces are really easy. Again, they're secure. This is in a containerized environment. We can actually upload our dev container to this. Actually, we're going to do that first. We're going to do our dev container before we do our code space. So if I spin up a code space now, it's just going to spin this up and run it as if it's a local bit of code. But let's build our dev container first so that when we spilled up our code space, it puts in all those tools for us, all right? This is why we should have a dev container in every project. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit more visually pleasing for everyone. Maybe. Oops. Where is my view? All right. So we're going to add a dev container. When we do this, we need to show our definitions. We can have any kind of definition we want. I'm going to use an Ubuntu container. Again, it's Linux. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and use the latest release, because what could break, right? We can install all the features we want to install here. This is great. I can say, I'm going to write my code in Ruby. I'm not writing my code in Ruby. Python. Python's really popular with cool kids these days, especially with data. And we can do Golang, right? I'm going to go ahead and select PowerShell. Hit OK. Yeah, let's do the latest, 7.1. Why not? It's going to automatically create this dev container folder right here. It's going to give me a dev container.json file. That is your default file. From here, we can add things in. We can add in other elements, etc. And what it does in this dev container.json is it adds our Docker file first thing. And from our Docker file, we can tell it to do other things. We can rebuild our container from that. Now, saying that, I should probably be running Docker locally. Now, there's 2 ways to run Docker, to run dev containers locally on your machine. So I have to install Docker, right? That takes time. If you're running Windows 11, you're running WSL 2. There's a way to not use Docker locally on your machine. I went to configure it the other day and broke my machine. So I'm going to use Docker locally at this point just to spin up our dev container, just because it works, and I'm not going to completely crash my system. So yeah, if you're running WSL2, you don't need to run Docker locally. My colleague, Ben Coleman, who's in engineering, has written a couple good articles on that. If anyone wants to see that, give me a shout later and I will send the link across how to set that up. And Docker Desktop takes a lot to run locally, which is also part of the problem. Right, so that's running. We're good to go. So this has set up a really simple JSON file for us, and it's just using PowerShell 7.1. But we can add other elements. I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit and look what the PowerShell team have spun up in theirs. So the PowerShell team run different extensions. So remember before when I was just using that little editor, I didn't have any extensions. So what's an extension? A linter, any testing tools. Any kind of thing to help you run better. If you're deploying to Azure, you need Azure extensions. Justin Grody did some demos on deploying to storage accounts. So we can add these in. Azure DevOps pipelines. This one adds .NET tools. So we could easily add these extensions to our dev container. So this one just does PowerShell 7.1. Pretty simple. It's built it. If I open here, I can reopen in my container. Let's see what happens. Watch me break it. It's going to break. So I've gone from running it locally to running into that PowerShell environment now. And let's see if it works. And then I can say it worked on my machine. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, show the logs. Good show. Let's see how good the internet is. This is very much internet dependent. So yeah, it does get a little bit, it takes a little bit of time to get started when we build it. But if you start your project with a dev container, yes, go ahead in the back.
Does it have any issues with Docker in Docker?
Docker? Meaning from...
Let's say, for instance, my workspaces, I'm assuming it's running on a container. If I want to spin up a SQL Server instance or a container for testing, would it have an issue with running Docker in Docker?
Yes.
Yes. You said SQL, and I automatically looked at the data people. I heard the word SQL, and I started shaking. I was like, not again.
It can be any container.
I will look at session.
So from look at their session, right? So the question was running SQL in a container. I have seen it, lived it, breathed it. I would rather spoon out my eyeballs with a salted spoon. But these two folks are your experts. Yes, it can be done. Also, there's a couple people out in the CNCF community. Oh God, I'm going to see him in a couple days. What's his name? Alessandro Vassa, also really good in that space. But these two are your experts. They're here today. Grab them after and pick their brains. Shh, yet. So it's taking me this long to get started, right? How long does it take our teams, our engineers to get started? A lot longer. I've pre-baked a few things. I want to build this on the fly because I want to spin up our dev container in our GitHub code space and write some code and see what happens. Maybe. Okay, well, let's thinking about opening. Is it open? No. I think it's open. I think we're good to go. All right. So I have a little PowerShell script. Let's see if it will. Shh. That's the point. Shh. Yeah, very simple. So what's not working is Github Co-Pilot. So it worked this morning. It's not working now. So what I was going to do with GitHub Co-Pilot and say, right, this is an out-of-date script. I was going to pull up a different way to connect to Azure, and we were going to write our for each loop a little bit better with Co-Pilot. Like I said, Co-Pilot is a finicky beast. But that's okay. Well, we built our dev container. Let's move on to other fun stuff. Actually, I need to save my changes and push it up to my repo first. I was trying to create a new initialize. Okay, let me pull out my dev container for a second. So I'm going to reopen this locally to push to GitHub just to save time and effort. Right, I'm going to run this locally. I'm going to save our changes. Did it really lose everything? No, that was good. Okay. So it just saw there a minute ago that I have a dev container. It wants to open it. I'm going to work locally and I'm going to push our changes up to our repo. I'm going to put a really good note as my developer comment of what I did so I can revert it later, and I can have full traceability. I think the internet is especially slow in this room. Okay, so we're good to go. I'm going to go back up to our repo. Just refresh my page. Voila, we have our dev container. So this is a repo I can now make public and share with you all to keep going. And we can use Co-Pilot. We can do all these things. We can enhance our security from here. We can go to the security tab and turn on push protection, etc. We're not going to do that today. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my code space. I can do it directly from my main branch, but I want to show you all how to create a code space real fast. So again, I can choose my main branch. If I have multiple branches or a working branch, if I'm a good developer, I'll open up my new branch and I can open up from there so I don't touch the main branch. But I can also open up a new branch after my dev container is open. Because I created that dev container, it sees it right here. You can embed multiple dev containers into a project. So if you have, so this one's PowerShell focused. Maybe if you have a different team, like a data team or a project management team that need a different set of extensions, you can put another dev container in another folder down, and it will see your dev containers when you go to spin up your code space. So when you have multiple teams and multiple people in a good DevOps working lifecycle working on this project, you can give them that access. So I want to go ahead and spin up our dev container. What region? We are sitting in near Europe West, so I'm going to keep my data here, and I can change my machine type. For what I'm doing, 4 cores and 8 gig of RAM is completely sufficient. So it's going to set up our code space, and it's going to spin up that dev container for us. If we don't have that dev container, it's just going to spin up our code. So if you're not working the dev container, that's okay. No one will get mad at you. But yeah, and it's found the image, and it's building that container now. This is going to be a lot faster than doing it on my machine. I hope. But we can also open this up in VS Code desktop. So if I'm working from a repository, I can open this up in VS Code, work locally, and if I make my changes in VS Code, I'll see it mirrored in code spaces. Failed. Okay, so when it doesn't build your container, it just gives you a specific container to spin up, not your dev container. That's okay. It's running a recovery container. Whatever. We're still going to be in a secure environment. The only difference is I'm not going to have my dev container running. Well, that will affect the long-term project? Technically, yes, but I can still do all the things I want to do. All right, well, that's running. I'm going to go into other things. How many of you have seen the PowerShell repository in GitHub? How many of you contributed to the issues? A couple of you. Cool. We're going to go over issues a little bit because I think this is an important part of the community part. When something doesn't work, we need to tell someone. We can't just complain about it to ourselves and moan at our desk. We need to tell someone. The PowerShell team is listening. That is part of being open source. They see your issue, your bug, your feature request, whatever it is. So we go into the GitHub repository. It's public. Everyone can see it. And we're going to go create a new issue. So there's a couple different issues we can open up. Bug reports. Any kind of error or action, we want to screenshot it, take note, get some logs, and send it to them. And that's going to be our bug report. What doesn't work and why doesn't it work? These bugs are going to make everything better. When we can report a bug, they can make everything better. The Azure DevOps product group and a lot of the other product groups push bug fixes out twice a day, without question. In the talk I gave earlier this week, I showed how many tests we run, how often we push our bug fixes, but it's twice a day. So Azure DevOps is twice a day. Each team is a little different. If we want to put in a feature request, you're like, I have a great idea. I want to make PowerShell better. Put in that feature request. Someone else may have done that as well. And the more people that put in that feature request, the higher up that priority food chain, they're going to put that into their roadmap. And that's really, really important. Microsoft Update Issue Report. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that one. Right, bug report. It's an important one, but we all know how Windows updates go. So when I create a bug, I want to put that something doesn't work. Who's had a PowerShell failure this week? I'm going to go ahead and create one. I know, PowerShell version 7.1 doesn't load from VS Code in a dev container. Right? I'm feeling a little angsty about what just happened. Is that fair? Not that I get angsty. And I really like, and Sydney pointed this out to me this morning because there's a template. Not all teams have a template. PowerShell team are super organized. They get a lot of requests. But please put in those requests. So that it automatically gives me a label, needs triage. They need to triage where it's going to go, right? Same thing as you go to the hospital. If you cut your finger, you're not first in line. If you're bleeding to death and puking up your guts, you'll be first in line, right? So if If PowerShell has brought down one of our largest customers, yeah. We need to write a descriptive title. Sure. Can we make it reproducible in the latest release version? I mean, I went into VS Code, I saw 7.1. Yeah, I think that's the latest release version, right? That's what it told me. Did we search the existing issues? Okay, we'll go back and do that. Yeah, I don't see it. Did we refer to the FAQ, right? Did we RTFM? I always RTFM, come on. Yeah, I know the differences, thanks. Steps to reproduce. Okay. I rebuilt my dev container. Still did not build with the default 7.1 version. Started from scratch, from net new, still broken. It's probably not my most descriptive. Expected behavior. Should just run. Is that our favorite response from our end users or what? Actual behavior. Oops. It broke. Error details, put it in error report, right? Environment data, important stuff. Visuals, absolutely get a screenshot, right? Get the logs, get your output of your logs. Submit this issue. Submit issues, submit features. Let this team make better products. And this goes for any product at Microsoft that has a GitHub repository. Let's see how our code space is doing. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I had a container issue. That's okay. And I can see all my logs here. This is what I would share with the PowerShell team, right? That's fine. We'll just mosey on past that. Why do I keep zooming out? Come on, little guy. You just want to go to 150 every time. Okay. Really important here. We can see that our dev container is loaded. Who has used live share? Oh, I like that. Who has tried to share their screen over Teams? Who thought that was a good experience? Yeah, you're lying. It what? From here, yes. Yes, you can. There's also a new feature coming out in Teams to use live share in Teams, right? That's coming out soon. That's going to be awesome. So Pierre Roman isn't here. He's my colleague. Pierre called me the other day. He's like, I'm having an issue in the tool Azure DevOps. What do I work in? Azure DevOps all day. I do other things with my life, by the way, but I tend to be the go-to person. And he shared it with me in Teams. Do you notice if you've seen both my talks, I've picked on Pierre both times? He shared to me in Teams, and I'm like, Pierre, for the love of all that is happening, I can't fix this for you. So I was like, you have to go here, and it was a painful process. Anyways, I can run live share from here. So I'm sitting here in Vienna. I could call someone in the UK and say, hey, help me fix this code. Help me fix this dev container. And I can share this out from my browser. And this is a secure way to share it. I can also see that all my extensions here are on the entire left side. I can see everything that I've installed. All my extensions are available to me. So when I hit that full stop or period, I can just edit some things. This is a full secure environment that gives me that full developer experience locally and in the cloud. The other thing I can do is I can run and debug my code here. So I can go ahead and run tests against my code within the Visual Studio code, GitHub code space. We've completely renamed it. So those, yeah, we rename everything at Microsoft. So what have I done today? I've opened up an issue because my dev container broke. But I should have a dev container on every single project, right? Now, the other thing I can do, because I'm impatient and maybe didn't want to open up a GitHub issue, I can take another dev container that I've used previously and just start that up from there. Due to time, not going to run with that today, but that's what I would probably do first. And if that still had an issue, I'd open up that bug. But it's important to be that sense of community, right? Open up those bugs, ask for those new features. Any product team you see at Microsoft, that's absolutely critical. So write secure code, support your community, and talk to the feature teams. So I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions. We have 5 minutes and 25 seconds left.
What's your favorite cheese?
My favorite cheese? Nacho cheese. Yeah, I already knew that one. Sorry. My bad. Let's see. Give you guys some resources to take away with.
I have a question. You mentioned the accessibility stuff in VS Code that you use to help keep your code and stuff. Are those extensions or features?
Usually just themes. I change my themes around to help. So sorry, the question was, what I use to help my accessibility within VS Code. There's a lot of work going into what we call developer accessibility. Again, the word developer at Microsoft, I'm sorry. Human accessibility, and we have teams working on that to make all the products better. Because the UI experience is absolutely terrible in a lot of what we produce. And it's not because we see it one way. The world's always kind of been seen in one way. So VS Code, I use different themes. Sometimes I can use different extensions, but for me, linting tools are my favorite. Spelling. So anything that can fix a spelling error. So I have a couple resources up on the screen for you. So we have the DevOps Lab. I've taken over from my colleague Abel Wang, the late Abel Wang. I am looking at the content I'm going to deliver in FY23. A lot of it is going to be PowerShell focused, I hope, pending the PowerShell team wanting to join. Hint. But I want feedback from you as a community, what kind of content you want to see, because that's how we write what our shows are going to be. Last year was a lot of infrastructure as code. Microsoft Learn modules. You want to learn how to use Visual Studio Code. You want to learn how to use Git. You want to learn how to use PowerShell. We have some great Learn modules out there that are free. And what's really cool about those free things is A, it's free. B, you can spin up a sandbox and you can learn stuff in a little remote environment without having to go spend on Azure. We have a DevOps blog. On the DevOps blog, on that same site, under a different extension, is the PowerShell blog as well. Check them out. And a lot of the product groups post to devblogs.microsoft.com. The last one is NoobsGen. For those of you who want to get started with infrastructure as code on Azure, NoobsGen does mostly Terraform, but they have just gone into preview with Bicep. So if you go, you'll literally tick the boxes. You can get started. It generates a template for you. You can throw that into VS Code and start deploying some infrastructure as code right off the bat, because I'm a bit infrastructure as code fan. So that's it for me. I'm going to let you guys go 3 minutes early. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you guys next time.